Hello and welcome back to the channel. It is time to go ahead and test out and see what it's all about for using the color checker chart for the outdoor photographer. And we'll just have a great time making sure our color is as best it can be once we get into post-production. So let's get right to it. The thing about using the color checker chart is we want to photograph it in the light that we, of course, are going to count on having our subject in. There's going to be a couple of assumptions that I'm going to be making tonight. The first assumption is that hopefully the light doesn't change too much as I'm going throughout the various subjects that I'm shooting. I want to shoot an object that is yellow. That's what the sunflowers are for. I also want to go with something that's got a little bit of red in it. And then I'm going to, of course, get a lot of green because of just green is everywhere on the farm. But then I'm going to go over and photograph something that's blue as well. And if I do notice a significant change in the light, then I'm going to go ahead and photograph this again. But the ideal, of course, is to photograph this in every different type of lighting that you have so that you have the absolute accuracy as it relates to what you're dealing with in the light and as far as the quality of the light, the color of the light, all of that good stuff. As the sun is setting, I am in open shade right now, and actually right now, right here, I'm actually casting a shadow on the color checker chart, but the flower that I'm going to photograph over yonder is not in the bright sunshine. So I'm going to be placing it over there in front of that flower, and then we'll get a reading off of that. So this device, this is the Color Checker Passport. It is also not just the color checker chart. Boy, this hinge is really tough sometimes. It's got a gray card and a white point here as well. So I'm going to be using this to judge my exposure, and then I'm going to be switching it over to the color checker chart, and I'll be photographing the color checker chart, and then we'll get to the subject. So let's get to that part right now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and frame up the image in camera. I'm going to then put this pretty much right next to it, although it'll probably be actually quite a bit closer, so I can fill the frame with this object, with this gray card object. And then I'm going to be taking this and taking a look at my histogram, and as this thing gets darker and brighter, I'll be able to kind of judge what's happening there, and then I'll be taking what I'm doing otherwise. Here, let's go ahead and focus on that doohickey and make sure I'm actually getting the gray, not the white. All right, so I'm going to show my histogram here, which of course you don't see. But what I'm looking at doing, I'm trying to get a reading that is just as perfect as possible to where that is spiking right in the middle. But as I fill my frame with this, I'm coming in at 400 ISO, f8 at 1/25th of a second. And so that should be sufficient for what I'm doing here. So now what I need to do is hold this out there in the same light and then make that picture of this object right there nice and big in the frame is what I like to do. Now really at f8, I'm probably going to go ahead and open that up to at least 5/6. And by doing that, I just minimize the opportunity for handshake as I'm holding this in front of the object. Now when I'm doing the picture of the object itself, I don't have a feeling that I need to lock myself into that exposure. What I need to do is go ahead and do whatever exposure I need for the subject. But what I really wanted to make sure was I got the color checker chart itself perfectly exposed, as perfect as possible, so that when I go and make the profile, I don't have anything going wrong one way or the other. All right, a few more compositional changes here. I think I want to get closer. Let's see here. That's still a little bit far away. What I think I'm going to do, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'll photograph this one right down here. I'm going to grab this one right here. I'm going to put on this extension tube, and that will allow me to do even closer focusing. And I'm going to take it up to 800 ISO because I just need a faster shutter speed. I do feel like I'm kind of rushing a little bit on these compositions, but this exercise is really more about just understanding that how the color system works and making sure that we can understand what is the best profile. Is it worth it to go through all this work and get the right profile for the work that we're doing out here in the great outdoors, kind of an idea, but maybe it's just easier and better to continue using the profiles that are built into Lightroom. That's kind of what I'm trying to do here with this, is to see, does it make sense to go through all that effort? All right, let's head on over across the way, and we've got a really cool subject coming up over there. All right, these subjects, these ball type subjects, these are actually leeks. And I just love how these things, they end up with like a little wizard's cap of some sort, little cap on it. That's really cool. And I've been eyeing this thing for quite a while. That is this T-bar, this T-post that's here in the garden. This is our no-till garden, by the way, where we just kind of let things go. We don't really get a whole lot out of this, but yeah, this subject I've been eyeing it all summer, and I'm finally out here grabbing a shot. So these reddish, these purple colors, this is, you know, another dynamic of the color that I wanted to be able to showcase as we're testing out color for what we're trying to do here. Some of these are more brilliant than others, for sure. I'm going to go ahead and put this down to f16 in hopes that I get a lot of depth of field in this shot. That thing with the little cap is centrally composed, and I've got this little T-bar off to the side. All right, so I've changed my composition, and I'm going to try and find my position, especially. I'm going to try and find a composition that gets me nice and close. I was thinking about this one down here, actually, and I'm still not necessarily close enough because I can still focus with this lens, although I am only about 80 millimeters. If I go to 105, that should become more of a challenge to achieve focus. Yes. So now I'm going to put the stacker, the spacer back in there. I should call it by its official name, the extension tube. Get at least one shot here before I really work the composition, just to make sure I have something that works for the color check that I want to do. I'm at f8, and that depth of field is just a bit too much. So I'm going to open it up to about 5.6. There we go, it's much better. And this is really calm now, so I'm going to take it back down to 400 ISO. And I've got the stem coming up to it, and I got this other thing here. I'm going to try and pull that out of the frame here. So I have just its stem leading up. Ah, that's very nice. Sweet. Okay, I have my yellow subject, kind of a reddish sort of subject. It's probably more purple than red. Certainly green is throughout. And what I noticed in my first video that I did was that blue was the big one that shifted. And I don't have anything blue yet, so I'm going to go across the way and we're going to find a cattle scratcher that doesn't do any good now because we don't have any cattle, but I'm going to find a cattle scratcher that is blue, and we'll frame that up with the big pumpkin leaves, and that will be our last shot. Okay, I'm going to allow myself to get sidetracked here because this is one of my favorite sunflowers. It's a pale yellow color, and I don't know why it's my favorite. Probably because the pale yellow is rather unique, at least of the sunflowers that we have here. It's fairly unique. And I'm going to go on trying to get just those petals as they come out to the side. Maybe even just the periphery of the petals. We'll see what happens here. So the composition I'm getting is just a little bit of the main central core, and then just the radiant yellow as it comes out. What's interesting as I'm composing this, the camera is set to auto white balance. And as I'm shifting around and getting this and whatever else in the frame, I'm getting a very distinct color shift as I'm doing that. And that's kind of the whole point of why we're doing this idea of calibrating for our color. We want to be able to say, whatever we're taking off of the raw data, off the raw image, we want to be able to just know with absolute assurity we have accurate color coming in. Now here's the thing about this scene versus where we were at over there. Certainly the light has shifted just a little bit. The sun has gone down another few degrees, and so the color temperature of everything has shifted just a little bit. So yes, theoretically, if I were to be, a purist of absolute terms in all the color ideals and everything, I would definitely get another shot of that color checker chart right here and just go through that process again. Certainly the problem with that is it's a pain to do that over and over and over. So we're going to test out and we're going to see how accurately this works. But my point is that I'm going to try and test out. I want to see if the one setup, if the one calibration is good enough to get me even more accurate color than when I'm using the Adobe Landscape or the Adobe Color or the Adobe whatever other standard profiles they have there in Lightroom. I want to be able to just compare and contrast and say, okay, what is the best starting point? And if that is still a better starting point for this frame up, for this light scenario, because nothing else has changed. I still have the same camera and I have the same lens, so nothing else has changed. Then I'm going to be doing pretty good, hopefully, I think, as it relates to a good starting point for where I'm at with that lighting scenario. All right, I'm going to try and grab a few of these little tidbits right on the very front of the flower, and then we'll go get that blue subject. All right, now we're off to go see the blue subject. All right, the previous owners had cattle, and we've been here almost 2 years now, and we still haven't gotten rid of this cattle scratcher, but we are growing a bunch of pumpkins, as you can see. And the hideousness over here is cardboard to try and experiment with keeping a little bit of grass down, but I'm going to try and lower this a little more. And what I'm going for is some foreground out of focus pumpkin leaves, and then some background areas while having a little bit of that blue. I'm going to go ahead and focus on the blue. I do need to take off the extension tube. I'm going to be at around 85 millimeters, and this will probably be one of the ugliest pictures I've taken all year. And again, my point on this one is purely about getting a blue subject so we can see how much the blue subjects shift when we do our color correction and we do our color calibration. All right, so now the next time you'll see me, I'll be in the studio loading these pictures into Lightroom, and we'll get the calibration going and see how this compares to the standard calibration and whether or not this is something that's worth it to do for an outdoor photographer. Hey there, and welcome to the studio. Now we're going to finish this process up. First thing we're going to do is get our profile made, and then we're going to go and compare profiles with these different pictures that we made. Now let's take a quick look at some of the pictures we did. So the first sunflower I did, you can see there's a great shift between these photos and these photos. It's just that tint, or the color temperature I should say, where we come over here, this is at 3950, and then we come over here, this one is at 6250. There's a great deal of difference going on with the color temperature. This is certainly what the camera is doing, what the camera is trying to, what it thinks is right and what's going on there. That will be interesting to see when we do this calibration process. If I were to have shot the color checker chart in this exact lighting with this exact color temperature on camera, I just wonder what would have happened. Being that I was in auto white balance mode, this might be a hitch in my get along. It might be a weakness in my process. So we'll just see how that goes, and you can learn from my mistakes if it turns out to be a mistake. And certainly we could go back if you wanted to, think about this again. We can always adjust the white balance. The idea of the profile is to have a foundational starting point. We don't worry about, if I'm on Adobe Landscape, we don't worry about usually adjusting that too much. We tend to find a profile that we like and we stick with it, at least for different types of subjects, different types of scenarios otherwise. But yeah, we'll adjust the white balance as needed. It's about that foundational starting point that we're interested in comparing and seeing if we got what we need here. All right, so some of these other images coming through, I did a little bit of a focus stack item here. I'm not going to do a focus stack right now. We're only looking to get this idea across. What are we going to do as it relates to color and how this works? And when that final piece of grass got removed, I really thought this framing worked out pretty cool. I probably could have used a little bit more depth of field, maybe done a little bit of a focus stack here, but that's just hindsight being 2020. Here's another one, this pale yellow. This one turned out pretty well. And then when I filled the frame with that brown mass in the center, of course that yellow shifted massively, and so we have a very different color temperature. So we'll deal with that when we get to it. Let's go, after that's just a quick review now, let's go and see what we got coming along here with our color checker chart. So this one's in focus, so I think I'll go ahead and try and use this one. Let me see if there's a difference at all. So this is the F8 one and this is the F5.6 one, but apparently I missed a little bit of focus, so I'm not going to worry about that so much. I'm going to go ahead and use this one. Now I also want to take a look. I'm going to take a quick gander. The fourth one over from the white. So this is number 1, 2, 3, and 4. This one should be in the neighborhood of about 50% if I got the best exposure possible. You'll remember my process. What I did was I went and got the grayscale form, the gray card side of this, and I tried to get that right in the middle. And then I forgot, if you will, I forgot to actually bracket this. Let's see what this one looks like. This is also in the 60s. This should ideally be in the 50s. So this is supposed to be, and what I'm looking at over here is where below the histogram it changes. Right now it's all the technical stuff from the shoot, but now that changes and it's 64%. This really needs to be in the neighborhood of 50%. So it's a little bit brighter probably than it needs to be. So this is slightly overexposed. Will that adjust? Will that somehow affect what we got going on in our profile? I think in general, yes, it will. It will create a little bit different. It would have been better to have a bracketed exposure. I'm still going to go through this process. I'm still going to make this work somehow, some way. We're going to make this happen. All right, so what we need to do now, we have this one frame selected, and I'm going to hit the export button. I'm going to come here and I'm going to do my X-Write presets. I'm going to click on that item, and here I'm going to call it Backyard 1. Simple enough. And in the previous video, I went through all of these other items. I'm not going to worry about those right now. I'm just going to do this quickly and go through the export. So if you want to see what that was all about, certainly hop on into the previous video and see the more details there. Additionally, when I was doing the previous video, I also experimented with setting the white balance here in Lightroom. That makes no difference in the overall results of what the calibration is all about. All right, so the calibration process is finished, and it still says processing up here, so I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. And then, unfortunately, we need to actually quit Lightroom. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to go quit Lightroom, and then I'm going to restart Lightroom. And of course, we'll skip this portion. We'll join you right here when Lightroom is restarted. Now that we have reloaded Lightroom, we are able to get back into the Develop module. We can click on this. We'll go over here to Browse, and we're going to select our profile. And so we did Backyard 1. So as I mouse over, take a look at those blues. Again, the blue is the huge shift here. We've got a little bit of shift, I think I noticed in the red in this lighting, more than I had last time in that previous shot. And this might be also due to the fact that I was a little bit more off in the exposure than what I did in the previous video. But again, we're still going to push through. We're going to run with it, and we'll see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and click my Backyard 1. and I'm going to hit close here, and so that pulls in that perfect color. Of course, the point though, the whole point and purpose of all of this is to now come in and say, okay, let us compare with the actual photos, with the real photos. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to select all my pictures and I'm going to synchronize them, and I'm going to make sure that we have calibration right here. Calibration is selected. All of these other items, it really doesn't matter. I didn't change a blame thing. I just want to make sure the calibration is all set to the same item, and then we're going to flip back and forth with what we got going on there. Now, notice I'm going to synchronize the white balance. So that does mean these white balances are going to all change as well. So right now I'm at 5850 on the white balance. So we will notice a big change, not only because of the white balance, but because of the calibration change as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Synchronize. Now that I've got that all synchronized out, I do have all of these coming in with the exact same white balance. I did actually have to change this because this was set to as shot, and so it was still initially not changing the white balance until I went and customized my white balance on this individual frame. But anyway, let's go now and take a look here. So here I've already selected this one as backyard one. Well, it is now backyard one, excuse me. And now let's go take a look at Adobe Landscape. This is what I usually select for my profile. It's not the one that I always stick with, but I usually have this one set to my profile. And now this is the first one. So this is the one that should be the most accurate starting point for my lighting scenario. And this would be now the Adobe Landscape. And we can see how different that is, especially in the yellows. Huge difference in the yellows. A little bit different in the green. Let's take a look at that again. And go down. I have to go down now to browse so I can find my item here. And really I can just mouse over it and it gives me that preview. So that's kind of nice. So which one do I like better? You know, I gotta say I kind of do like the one that I did. The one that I made, the custom profile as a starting point. I do kind of like that better. I'm getting a little bit more what I feel as realistic color, real color coming through in the yellow. Now the green, to me, it is on this screen. This is a calibrated screen. The green to me is a little bit rich, a little bit hot. But of course I can go and now make my adjustments. I can go in and make it the more artistically perfect color. Right now, I would describe this as being a little more on the scientifically perfect color idea. Now let's take a look at this one. This one, we recall on the auto white balance, it had a significant shift. In fact, I'm going to go with one of these more close-in ones. This definitely feels way more natural with this white balance adjustment as well. So the white balance adjustment is the same as what this one was initially set at. Now, what I could do here, I could set a white balance on this item here. And when I pick that as my white balance target, we can see it just goes way different. This is an interesting thing to note too, because once we change white balance, all these other color pieces change. So to fully understand what's happening behind the scenes, it would be very interesting to talk to the color scientists over there at X-Rite, now Calibrate, and just get a really good assessment of what exactly is going on there. I'm going to go ahead and synchronize, at least through this white balance. And we can get an assessment here. This is just really warm. And when I go back and I switch this to Adobe Landscape, and then go back and forth with this, here's and then here's Landscape, we can see there's a lot more depth to this orangish, brownish color here in the center. What about the greens? Yeah, the greens might feel a little bit more natural too. Let's go ahead and shift back to backyard one. And this is all the way now 9,500, where originally this was considerably less. It was in the 5,900 range. So we'll take it back to about 5,950 or so. And that felt really natural. So let's go back to Adobe Landscape. This is really interesting what's going on with how this all comes together. So I'm going to say that on this shot, actually, I kind of like the Adobe Landscape a little better. Let's go ahead and take a look at this shot now. So this is the 5907. That's what it was originally set to. I think I'll go with this vertical shot here. I'll grab the one where the main thing is in focus. And let's go ahead and switch ourselves to Adobe Landscape. All right, a little bit of a difference on this one. Let's go ahead and do the toggling back and forth. Again, with a starting point is a little bit richer in these reds, a little bit richer in these brown type colors. And for my aesthetics, I really do like that. And so that's something that I'm just going to be naturally drawn towards. So right now, what I'm saying is I'm leaning towards just saying sticking with my standard process and not worrying about this whole thing as it relates to just thinking, oh, I have to, calibrate my camera too. I got to be really bent on that and making sure that happens. All right, let's go back with this one over here now and Adobe Landscape. See, this one, I actually liked my calibration better. Now here's the deal. Let me look at the greens. Now see, on this one, with mine, the custom, the greens are toned down just a little bit, but those pinks are really, really just come to life. I love the color of those pinks as a starting point with my custom item, with my custom profile. That is gorgeous. I do love that. All right, let's get over here to this pale sunflower. All right, we're on backyard 1. Let's go to Adobe Landscape. Not a whole lot of difference. A little bit more, it feels like a little bit more difference in the overall contrast of the main petals area. You can see here the shadows just aren't as deep on mine as a starting point. I can always make those changes. That's the thing about whatever profile you're starting with. We're just looking for the best starting point for the subject. So even on this one, even though this is supposedly going to be that quote-unquote perfect type color, I'm still going to probably want to adjust my, it's a little bit too green. I'm going to want to adjust my white balance. Something along those lines. And of course, I want to then mess with highlights and whites and all these types of things to just really knock it out of the park with my overall exposure. But again, the starting point, that is the key point that we're trying to drive home here. All right, so now it got, I guess I did some shooting afterwards. I'm looking at all these extra shots. I'm like, what's going on? But I did get some shooting done afterwards. All right, so now with the blue subject, we noticed in the initial color checker chart, the blue had a really significant shift. Let's see how it shifts with this one. So we're in the backyard 1. Let's go to my Adobe Landscape. Again, this is just my normal. I'll go ahead and select Adobe Color in the next time here as well, but let's make this happen. It doesn't feel like a huge shift. Let's go to Adobe Color. See, even less saturated. And now let's say Adobe Color against mine. So right now it's Adobe Color. Whoops, that wasn't what I wanted. So right now it's Adobe Color, and now let's go choose my custom. Yeah, there's still a lot more depth in that blue for sure. And in this one, I'm definitely going to appreciate the blue, the way the blues come through. But again, when we compare it to my standard Adobe Landscape, there's just a difference in that depth of the blue. That's what's weird about this. It didn't seem to, when we went with Adobe Color, it definitely fell flat comparatively. When we went with the custom profile, it brought back a little bit of life to it. It brought back a little bit of just something extra in that blue. And then we went with Adobe Landscape. It didn't lose most of it. The biggest shift really is in the greens. Take a look at that. So this is Adobe Landscape, and now here's mine, and that there's just not a huge shift in the blues. That's interesting. There's a little bit greater contrast in Adobe Landscape, a little bit less contrast in mine. But those greens have a huge shift, a little more towards the yellow spectrum for those greens. So hopefully this is something we can learn from. The whole point of this whole exercise was to just help determine, is it even worth it to do this process When you're just working with a single camera, in the previous video I talked about this is the process you definitely want to use if you're trying to synchronize the color between two cameras. This is what you want to do because it's going to help you get really, really close and synchronize color between your two different cameras, whether they be two different makes of cameras or just two different models within the same manufacturer. It doesn't matter. You're going to experience some at least subtle, if not more major, color shifts as you're going throughout your shoot. But for the standard outdoor photographer, where you're out there and you're just shooting away, does it make sense to use this process? Right now, I've got to say, I'm really not sold on this process. I really did appreciate how these pinks started in the beginning. And this is maybe something that I can just put in my mind and say, hey, you know what? Now I know, at least in the outdoor setting, the standard outdoor setting, the whole idea, the whole notion of what's happening in the blues, it really wasn't that big of a deal, at least not in the lighting that I shot in last night. And when I was, and that's actually usually the type of lighting that I shoot in anyway, the biggest difference, the biggest change came through a little bit in the greens and a lot of bit as far as how much better I feel it came across in these pinkish type colors. The yellows were okay. So when we go back and take a look at our yellows from our standard shot here, and we go back to Adobe Landscape, just a little bit more contrast, but the greens, in my opinion, really kind of fell apart a little bit more than compared to mine. Here the greens, yeah, they're a little bit rich still, but I can easily tone those down and make those adjustments the way I want to make them. So this is something where you can make a determination for yourself. Now you know how the process goes. Maybe there's a few holes in my process. Those ideas of white balance, that idea of getting even a better exposure so that we can make sure that this item comes in at as close to 50% as possible. Those are going to be a couple of ideas that we probably want to explore a little bit more and make sure that we're a little bit tighter in on our process so that we get even greater control and greater just everything coming out exactly the way it needs to come out, exactly the way it needs to come through as we're working with everything we got going on here. All right, thank you so much for being here and watching. Thank you so much for commenting below. I love to see your comments. Let's get the conversation started. Let me understand. Let me know what you're thinking, what questions you have, and what should I do further? Where should I go next as it relates to this process or maybe some other process? Let me know. If you've not taken a listen to the podcast recently, I invite you to look it up. There's the artwork. Look it up in your favorite podcast player. All right, thanks again so much. Until next time, God bless and happy shooting.